It was just past dusk when Earl Johnson sat by the edge of the cracked sidewalk behind the old gas station, stirring the contents of a small tin can over a flickering flame. The air was cool and quiet, the kind of silence that belonged to forgotten parts of town, places where stories rarely reached beyond the people living them. Earl was 62, a Vietnam veteran who had seen more than his share of hard years. His shack, built from salvaged wood and rusted sheets of metal, sat just behind the station near a line of scrub trees. It wasn't much, but it was his, a place where he could keep his things dry, watch the stars at night, and remind himself that he was still standing. That evening, he'd managed to trade some old batteries and a bit of scrap for a loaf of bread and a small can of chili. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and after a long day collecting recyclables, warmth was enough. He had just started to eat when the sound of a rumbling motorcycle broke the quiet. The engine growled low, deep and heavy, echoing through the narrow alleyway. Earl looked up as the headlight cut across the cracked pavement and stopped near his fire. The rider was tall, wearing a black leather jacket and heavy boots. His helmet gleamed under the weak light before he lifted it off, revealing a thick beard, sharp eyes, and a tired expression. The jacket bore the unmistakable red and white patch, Hell's Angels. Earl tensed instinctively. Not from fear, but caution. Life on the street had taught him to read people quickly. The biker looked around for a moment, then nodded toward the can over the flame. "Smells good," he said in a gravelly voice. Earl shrugged. "Just chilly, man. Ain't much." The biker dismounted, setting his helmet on the seat. "Mind if I sit?" Earl studied him for a moment, then gestured toward a crate beside him. "Ain't my land. Sit wherever you like." The man lowered himself down slowly, the firelight dancing against the silver chains on his jacket. For a few seconds they just sat in silence. Then the biker said, "Haven't eaten since morning. Gas station closed early. Guess I pushed my luck on the road." Earl tore his bread in half and handed a piece over. "Then I guess luck ain't done with you yet." The biker looked at him, surprised. "You sure?" Earl nodded. Man can't eat alone and call himself blessed. The biker accepted it quietly, breaking the bread in half again before dipping it into the chili. They ate without talking much, two men from entirely different worlds, sharing a quiet meal by a trash fire. After a while, the biker said, "Name's Royce." "Earl," the veteran replied. Royce nodded. "You been out here long?" "Long enough," Earl said simply. "Got this little shack a while back. Keeps the rain off. Folks at the gas station let me fill my water jug sometimes." Royce glanced toward the small structure, crooked walls patched with plastic tarps, a faded flag nailed to the door. "You built that yourself?" Earl smiled faintly. "Wasn't anyone else lining up to do it?" They both chuckled quietly. For a while neither said anything. The fire burned low, and the hum of the highway in the distance was the only sound. Finally Royce said, "You were in the service, weren't you?" Earl nodded slowly. "Vietnam. Long time ago. My old man was a Marine," Royce said. "Did 2 tours. He passed a few years back. Never talked much about it, though." "Most of us don't," Earl replied. "There ain't much good in reliving it." Royce nodded, his expression thoughtful. When the food was gone, Earl set the empty can aside. Royce reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded 20 and tried to hand it to him. Earl shook his head. "Keep it, I got what I need," Royce frowned. "You shared your dinner with me. Least I can do." "Wasn't about what it cost," Earl said. "Man's hungry, you feed him. Ain't got to make it complicated." Royce looked at him for a long moment, then slowly tucked the bill back into his pocket. "You're all right, Earl." Earl smiled. "Don't let the beard fool you." Royce chuckled, stood and put on his helmet. "Appreciate the meal. You ever need anything and anything at all, ask for Royce Cutter down at the Iron Legion bar on 8th. You tell him I sent you." Earl nodded, though he doubted he'd ever take him up on it. He'd learned not to expect much from promises. Royce started his bike, the deep rumble cutting through the night again. He gave Earl a small salute before disappearing into the darkness, tail light fading down the road until the sound was gone. Earl sat by the dying fire, staring into the last flickers of orange. He didn't know why, but something about that man's tone felt genuine, like a piece of decency he hadn't seen in a long while. He smiled faintly to himself, then crawled into his shack and fell asleep to the sound of wind moving through the trees. Morning came slow and grey. Earl woke early, stretched, and stepped outside to gather a few cans. His back ached, but he moved with the ease of habit. He was halfway through filling his old cart when he heard it again, that deep, unmistakable rumble of motorcycles. At first, he thought it was 1 or 2. Then 5, then 10. The sound grew louder, heavier, until the entire road vibrated beneath his feet. Earl looked up to see a line of chrome and leather rolling toward him. Dozens of bikes, one after another, engines growling like thunder. They stopped in formation along the street beside the gas station, 50 men and women dismounting, almost in unison. Every one of them wore the same insignia, Hell's Angels. The noise faded, replaced by silence. Earl stood frozen, hand still on his cart. "Lord," he muttered, "what on earth?" Royce stepped forward from the crowd, pulling off his helmet. He was grinning this time. "Told you if you ever needed anything, I'd handle it," he said. Earl blinked. "Didn't think you meant it literal." The others started unloading supplies from their bikes: lumber, tools, paint cans, insulation rolls. A few carried coolers of food. Others had sleeping bags, gloves, and bottled water. Royce clapped a hand on Earl's shoulder. "You gave me food when you didn't have any to spare. The guys heard about it. Figured we'd return the favor." Earl looked around, speechless. As the group began moving toward his shack, a biker named Tammy, a woman with sun-browned skin and grease under her nails, grinned as she dropped a tool bag. "I hope you don't mind a little noise, old-timer. We're building you a real roof today." Within minutes, the quiet stretch of dirt behind the station turned into an organized storm of hammers, saws, and laughter. Planks were cut, nails driven, and the skeleton of a new shelter began to rise. Earl stood back, eyes wide, hands trembling slightly. He whispered to Royce, "You didn't have to do all this." Royce smiled. "No, we wanted to. You reminded me what respect looks like, and these people take that seriously." All day the work continued. Some bikers built, others cooked. The smell of barbecue drifted through the air, while music played from a portable speaker. Earl hadn't seen that much joy, that much life, in one place in years. When the sun began to set, his shack had been transformed, a small but sturdy cabin with new walls, a metal roof, a working door, and even a window that let in the evening light. They'd left a small plaque by the door made from an old engine plate. It read, "Respect given, respect returned." Iron Legion 2024. Earl stood staring at it, his voice catching as he said, "I don't know how to thank you." Royce shook his head. "You already did. Last night." As the engines roared to life again and the sun dipped low, Earl watched the long line of bikes disappear down the highway. The road went quiet, but his yard, now full of sawdust, footprints, and laughter that still lingered in the air, felt alive again. For the first time in years, Earl didn't feel forgotten, he felt seen. The next morning, the air smelled like fresh sawdust and sunlight. The small patch of land behind the gas station, where Earl Johnson had lived for years in a crooked tin shack, looked completely different. The old scraps of wood and rusted nails had been cleared away. In their place stood a simple, sturdy cabin made of clean pine planks, a real door, and a roof that no longer leaked when it rained. Earl stood in the doorway holding a chipped coffee mug, steam rising from the instant coffee one of the bikers had left him. His old army jacket hung loosely around his shoulders, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs. But for the first time in years, his shoulders were straight, and his eyes didn't look tired. He still couldn't believe it had all happened. 50 bikers. 50 strangers, people most of the world crossed the street to avoid, had shown up and rebuilt his home. All because he'd shared half a can of chili with one man who looked hungry. The roar of engines had faded hours ago, replaced by birds and the faint hum of the highway. The quiet was strange now, almost too quiet. He missed the sound of their laughter, the hammers tapping, the music that had played from that little Bluetooth speaker all day. He set his mug down on the windowsill, the smell of coffee mixing with the scent of fresh lumber, and smiled to himself. "Ain't the noise that makes a day good," he muttered. "It's the people behind it." By mid-morning, Royce Cutter, the biker he'd fed 2 nights earlier, came rumbling back down the dirt road alone. His bike glistened in the sun, red paint gleaming. He parked near the fence line and removed his helmet, grinning when he saw Earl standing by the porch. "Morning, old-timer," Royce said. How's the new place treating you? Earl laughed. Feels strange waking up without a draft coming through the walls. Guess I could get used to it. Royce climbed the steps and handed him a small grocery bag. Brought some breakfast stuff. Eggs, bacon, even some coffee that doesn't taste like dirt. Earl chuckled. Careful, man. You keep this up, I'll start thinking you're an angel. Don't ruin my reputation like that, Royce said, laughing. They sat together on the porch, sipping coffee and listening to the morning settle around them. The sound of birds and distant trucks filled the air. After a while, Royce said, You did something a lot of people wouldn't have. You didn't know me, and you still gave me half your dinner. Guys like you remind the rest of us that decency's still out there. Earl shrugged. You were hungry. That's all I needed to know. Folks these days spend too much time looking for reasons not to care. Royce nodded slowly, eyes scanning the yard where the dirt was still marked by motorcycle tire tracks. Yeah, guess that's true. They sat in silence again for a moment, both watching a delivery truck pass down the road. Then Royce pulled a folded envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to Earl. Earl frowned. What's this? Something the club wanted you to have, Royce said. Don't get mad until you've opened it. Earl tore the envelope open, revealing a stack of neatly folded bills and a note written in thick black ink. Earl, you reminded us what family means. Use this to keep your place running. We'll check in soon. Iron Legion M. Cyril's hands trembled slightly as he read it. Lord have mercy, he whispered. This is more money than I've seen in years. Royce smiled faintly. They took up a collection. Most of the guys chipped in what they could. You've got enough there for groceries, repairs, maybe even a heater for the winter. Earl looked up, his eyes glistening. Why? Why would y'all do all this for me? Royce leaned back against the railing, his gaze distant. Because you didn't ask for anything in return. Most folks who see our jackets only see the headlines, think we're all trouble. Truth is, most of us just want to be treated like people. You did that. You didn't flinch, didn't run. You shared what little you had. That kind of thing sticks with a man. Earl sat quietly, trying to find words, but none came. He simply nodded, folding the letter carefully and tucking it back inside the envelope. Royce stood and stretched. We've got a few more projects like this lined up. The guys want to start helping more vets, folks down on their luck. You kinda lit the fire for that. Earl's eyebrows rose. Me? Yeah, Royce said. Guess one small act of kindness spreads faster than a Harley on open road. Earl chuckled softly. Guess so. Royce pulled his helmet back on, then paused. You need anything, Earl, anything at all. You come by the Iron Legion bar on 8th, doesn't matter what time it is. You've got brothers there now. Earl nodded. Don't you worry. So I ain't much for asking, but I know when I got family. Royce gave a quick salute, then started the engine. The roar echoed through the quiet air, rolling like thunder down the narrow road. Earl watched until the red taillight disappeared beyond the bend. He turned back toward the cabin, still half expecting it to vanish like a dream. But it was there, solid, warm, real. He stepped inside and looked around. On the little table sat the new groceries, the note from the bikers, and an old photo he kept in a tin box, him in uniform, young and hopeful, smiling beside his squad. For the first time in a long while, he whispered, I made it, fellas. I'm still here. That evening, Earl lit a small fire behind the cabin and sat quietly, the sky fading into orange and purple. The highway hummed in the distance, and the wind rustled through the trees. Every now and then, he swore he could still hear the faint growl of motorcycles on the horizon, a sound that no longer brought fear or judgment, but peace. They weren't just engines anymore, they were a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of generosity could roar louder than any machine in the world. The days that followed were calm, filled with the kind of quiet that comes after a storm of goodness. The bikers had left, the tools were gone, and the laughter had faded from the yard. But Earl Johnson still woke every morning to echoes of it all. His cabin, once just a shelter of patched tin and hope, stood solid now, straight, sturdy, proud. The new wood smelled faintly of pine when the sun warmed it, and the roof gleamed silver in the light. Every morning, he brewed the good coffee Royce had left him, sitting on the porch steps with his metal mug and an old transistor radio that barely worked. He liked the hum of the static mixed with birdsong. It reminded him that life was messy, but still worth listening to. Word of what the Hells Angels had done spread quietly around town. People at the gas station started waving to him more often. A woman from the diner down the road stopped by one morning, leaving a bag of pastries on his porch before driving off. Even the high school kids, who used to throw rocks near his shack years ago, now waved when they rode past on their bikes. Earl didn't ask for any of it. He just kept to his routine, fixing what needed fixing, keeping his small space tidy, and spending his afternoons at the community garden a few blocks away. They're trading stories with the other old-timers who came there to feel useful, but something inside him had changed. For years, Earl had lived like a shadow, visible but unseen. He'd gotten used to the way people's eyes slid past him on the sidewalk, but now something as simple as a nod from a stranger felt like light breaking through. The bikers hadn't just rebuilt his home. They'd rebuilt his sense of belonging. One Thursday afternoon, as he was trimming the weeds by his fence, he heard that familiar deep rumble again, the kind of sound that made the ground itself vibrate. He smiled before he even turned around. 5 motorcycles rolled down the road and stopped near his driveway. The men dismounted, laughter already in the air. Royce was at the front, wearing his same black leather jacket, the club patch on the back glinting in the sun. "Well, look at that," Royce called out, grinning. "The old shack's still standing." "Guess our handiwork held up," Earl laughed. "Better than most houses in this town." Royce walked up and shook his hand firmly. "How you holding up, brother?" "Like a man with a roof that don't leak," Earl said. The others started unloading things from their bikes. Grocery bags, a box of tools, even a small portable heater. "Brought a few things you might need," Royce said. "And the boys wanted to check on you." Earl's voice caught slightly. "Though you didn't have to do that," Royce shrugged. "You fed me when you didn't have to, remember? Guess we're just keeping the tradition alive." They spent the afternoon repairing the fence, tightening loose boards and swapping stories. Earl learned about some of their past rides, cross-country trips, long nights on the road and near misses with bad weather. He told them stories from his own days in the army, some funny, some quiet, all honest. As the sun began to dip low, one of the younger bikers, a tall guy named Hank, sat beside Earl on the porch. "You know," he said, "when Royce told us what happened, I didn't believe it at first. I figured no one out here would share food with a guy in a Hells Angels jacket." Earl smiled. "Guess we both learned something, huh?" Hank nodded. "Yeah, people like to make up their minds before they meet you. But sometimes one good meal changes everything." Earl looked out across the yard. The air was golden now, the sky streaked with orange and violet. "You know," he said slowly, "I used to think the world got colder the older you got. Now I see it's just about who's standing next to you when the night comes." Royce, overhearing from nearby, smiled faintly. "You ever think of writing stuff like that down, Earl?" "You've got a way of putting things," Earl chuckled. "I'm better with a hammer than a pen." "Maybe," Royce said, "but words like that stick." When dusk fell, the group lit a small fire pit beside the cabin. They grilled some sausages, passed around sodas and sweet tea, and told stories until the stars began to spill across the sky. For once, Earl didn't feel like an outsider listening in. He was part of it. The laughter, the warmth, the quiet respect between men who had all been through something. At one point, Royce stood and raised his bottle. "To Earl," he said, his voice carrying through the night, "a man who reminded us that kindness still means something." Earl's throat tightened, and all he could manage was a small nod. "To Earl." The rest echoed, clinking bottles and cans together. He laughed, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in a long time. When the fire finally burned low and the night turned cool, the bikers packed up their things. Royce was the last to leave. Before putting on his helmet, he looked at Earl and said, "You changed something, you know. Not just for me, for all of us. We've been talking about setting up a fund for veterans. Might start with this town." Earl's eyebrows rose. "A fund for guys like me?" "Exactly," Royce said. "We're calling it Operation Brotherhood. Figured it's time we start giving back to the people who gave everything first." Earl stared at him for a moment, then smiled softly. "Guess good things travel faster than bad ones sometimes. Only if they've got the right engine behind them," Royce said with a grin. When the bikes roared to life again, Earl stood on the porch, hand raised in a quiet salute as the headlights disappeared down the road. The night felt full again. Not lonely, not empty, just alive. He walked back inside his little cabin and looked around at everything they had built. The table, the cot, the warm walls that didn't let the wind through. Then he looked at the letter from the bikers, still pinned above the door. Respect given. Respect returned. He traced the words with his fingertip, whispering, "You boys sure meant that." As he turned off the lamp and lay down for the night, the distant sound of motorcycles echoed faintly through the valley, like thunder rolling far away. And this time, Earl didn't just hear noise, he heard family. By late autumn, the small town of Redfield had all but adopted Earl Johnson as one of its own. People who once passed by him without a glance now stopped to chat, bringing him spare groceries or old newspapers to read. The man who'd once been invisible had somehow become a quiet local legend. Not because he'd asked for help, but because he'd given it. It had been months since that night when 50 bikers showed up and rebuilt his shack. In that time, the simple cabin behind the gas station had become a symbol of something rare, proof that kindness could ripple outward, crossing barriers that most folks never thought could be bridged. One crisp November morning, Earl woke to the sound of engines again. Not the thunder of 50 motorcycles, but the steady growl of a small convoy. When he stepped outside, his breath puffed in the cold air. A group of 6 riders pulled up and parked neatly along the fence line. The familiar red and white patches of the Iron Legion gleamed in the sunlight. Royce Cutter was in front, just like always. He swung a leg off his bike, pulled off his helmet and grinned. "Morning, old soldier," he said. "You got time for visitors?" Earl laughed, tugging his jacket tighter. "I got time for family." Coffee's hot, they followed him inside. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and roasted beans. The walls were lined with small things people had given him. Books, tools, even a framed photograph one of the bikers had taken the day they'd finished building the place. Royce set a small box on the table. "We brought something for you," he said. "From all the boys." Earl eyed the box warily. "If that's more money, you can keep it." "You already gave me too much," Royce chuckled. "It ain't money this time." Earl opened it carefully. Inside was a worn military patch mounted on a wooden plaque. The words Operation Brotherhood burned into the grain below it. He stared at it for a long moment, his throat tight. "You started it," Royce nodded. "We did. The fund's real now. We've already helped 3 vets fix up their homes. Food, shelter, medical bills, and whatever they need. It's growing fast." Earl set the plaque down gently, tracing the edges with his fingertips. "Never thought a can of chili would start all that." Royce smiled. "Sometimes the smallest spark starts the biggest fire." They spent the rest of the morning drinking coffee and talking, not about the past, but about what came next. Royce told him about their plans to expand the program, partnering with local veterans groups, helping others get back on their feet. When they finished, Earl insisted on walking them back to their bikes. The sky was pale blue, the trees bare except for a few stubborn leaves. Before Royce put on his helmet, he looked back at the small cabin, the one he and his brothers had rebuilt. "You know," Royce said, "every time we ride out on a project, the guys still talk about you. They say, if Earl could share what little he had, we sure as hell can share what we've got." Earl smiled, eyes shining. "Tell him that's the best thing I ever heard." Royce nodded, then started his bike. The engines roared to life one by one, filling the cold air with that deep, steady sound Earl had come to love. As they pulled away, Earl raised his hand in salute. He watched until the last bike disappeared over the hill, the echo of their engines fading into the wind. Then he turned back toward his cabin, the plaque under his arm, and smiled. He placed it above the small fireplace, right under the old American flag that had hung there since the first day he moved in. For a while he just stood there, watching the light from the fire dance over the words. Later that afternoon, he walked down to the gas station, where a few locals were gathered near the pumps. When they saw him, they called out greetings. "Hey, Earl. How's the house? Looking good, old man." He chuckled and nodded at them. "Still standing. Guess those bikers know their carpentry." The clerk at the counter smiled. "Heard they've been helping other vets now. You started something big, Earl." Earl paused, considering that. "Nah," he said softly. "It started itself. I just happened to be standing in the right place when it did." That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, Earl lit his small lantern and sat by the window. The sound of the highway hummed faintly in the distance, but for once it didn't sound lonely. It sounded like movement, like life continuing. He thought about all the years he'd spent invisible, all the nights he'd wondered if anyone would ever remember him once he was gone. And now, somewhere out there, Men on motorcycles were rebuilding homes, helping veterans, carrying his story forward without even realizing it. He smiled, whispering to himself, "Guess we all got engines in our hearts. If somebody just helps them start." As darkness settled, the air grew still. The cabin glowed from within, a small steady light in the quiet of a sleeping town. Earl leaned back in his chair, the warmth of the fire reaching his hands, the plaque shining faintly above him. He didn't have much, but what he did have, a home, a name, a legacy of kindness, was worth more than anything he'd ever owned. And somewhere out there, the road was rumbling again, carrying the sound of engines and gratitude through the night. Because sometimes, the loudest act of love doesn't come from words or promises. It comes from people who simply show up.